Hi everyone, welcome back to a new episode on All the Cool Kids Are Vegan podcast. This time I got another guest with me. I invited specifically to talk about all things plant-based nutrition because he's a medical student and he literally, like, if you follow him on Instagram, his name's Plantitude. So his name is Akash, aka Plantitude. And it's on Instagram, he talks all about plant-based nutrition, what's the healthiest, like the nutrients to hit, how to be the most healthy that you can be. So I'm really excited to talk about all things health. So thank you, Akash, for being on today's podcast with me. Welcome.
Thank you for the intro. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, so exciting. We actually just met on Insta, literally, and like I think we were talking just about how I'm like about plant-based nutrition and stuff, and I was like, I need to get you on a podcast and like we can talk more about this and like share with people all that you know, because I think a lot of people struggle with this aspect of veganism where people might turn vegan for the animals and then they just kind of don't know how to go further, like how to hit those plant-based nutrition, how to just how to have just a balanced diet and be the healthiest they can be. And I think a lot of people also get backlash where they're like, oh, a vegan diet's not healthy because A, B, or C. So yeah, let's debunk all those things and let's, share the facts. Do you want to share a little bit more about yourself, about your background, about in medicine, like how long have you been in school now? And yeah, just do you want to share a little bit more about yourself?
Yeah, I think you bring up a lot of things we're going to talk about, so I'm excited for the discussion. So I'm born and raised Long Island, lived in New York most of my life, and then I went to George Washington University in D.C. for undergrad, spent 4 years there, and now I'm at University of Miami for medical school in Florida.
Amazing. What did you study for your undergrad, actually?
So I was on the pre-med track, but I actually got a degree in business administration with the concentration in accounting. And I also had a minor in bio and chemistry. And so right now I'm actually doing a dual degree program at University of Miami. It's MD and MBA.
Amazing. So then when did you start on your journey on like plant-based nutrition? And actually, when did you turn vegan? Let's start right there.
Yeah, so I think I turned vegan officially August 2021, somewhere around there, August or September. So it's been well over a year now, and I was raised vegetarian, so my whole family's vegetarian, so not too difficult of a transition, but I was definitely one of those people that, always says that they can't give up cheese, and that's why they could never go vegan. But I think, even when I was vegetarian, like you said, there's multiple reasons for going vegan. And it was multifactorial for me as well, animal reasons as well as health reasons and environmental. And so I definitely had a lot of cognitive dissonance being vegetarian for animal reasons, but not vegan, because I knew just how equally messed up, or if not worse, the dairy industry is. I always had this internal struggle where I was still eating dairy products, but I felt like a hypocrite because I was vegetarian for, quote, the animal reasons. And I own like a leather wallet and all these things. So it was just this internal struggle of, am I really helping the animals that much if I am kind of just ignoring all the things that are going on in the dairy and egg industry as well? So it was a bit of a slow transition. I started to incorporate more plant foods. And that's how I think everyone should do it. It should be a slow transition. I think for long-term sustainable changes, it's hard to go cold turkey. But, eventually I got to a point where I was like, I could do this. And then I think it was some of the Netflix documentaries that push a lot of people over the edge. They pushed me over the edge as well. I think a friend had shown me Game Changers. And, that documentary definitely has its holes in their approach and their studies, but it definitely achieved its main goal, which was showing that you can achieve high athletic performance and health on a vegan diet.
Because you are quite into like the fitness aspect of it.
Yeah, I've always, since late high school, early college, been into fitness. And so kind of tying those together, trying to decide how to incorporate a plant-based diet and my values with, animal advocacy and environmental causes with health and fitness.
Nice. So when did that start for you your journey on sharing that on Instagram as well, to share all that you know about plant-based nutrition and just get the word and the knowledge and the facts out there on plant-based nutrition?
it's funny you say all that you know, but I feel like I know nothing. The more I get into the whole nutrition space, and I guess that's the Dunning-Kruger effect they call it. The more you get into it, the less you feel like you know. But I got to medical school in August. I actually got there a little bit earlier for MBA classes, and just interacting with a lot of new people, and they kind of saw my lifestyle and a lot of the things that I do, and talking about nutrition and all this stuff, and it started to benefit them. I was giving people some advice here and there, and so they're the ones who pushed me to make some sort of platform. They were like, you should get on Instagram. A lot of people could benefit from this, and I was never the type of person who ever thought that I would be the person sharing this kind of information, even if you asked me a year ago.
But it's so valuable.
Yeah, I kind of just always thought I'd be the person that would do my own thing and, learn and do it for myself. But then I started to see how much other people could benefit from sharing just some basic information about, like, how to eat a little bit healthier, and they feel so much better, because just a large portion of the U.S. population is just deficient in so many different things, and the standard American diet isn't great.
Yeah, I just like, I feel like it's so important, like it's so valuable to share that information, because there's not much out there, right, that really talks about how to be the healthiest, or there's a lot of misconceptions, misinformation out there as well, which we'll talk about more as well today. About some of the misconceptions. But yeah, that's awesome. I think it's amazing that you're sharing, because I think there's so much to learn about nutrition, and it's cool that you're actually, like, curious and going to studies about it and all that stuff. That's really cool. So then, if people, like, are looking for vegan aspiring people, if they don't know yet, like, how to go about it for a vegan diet, what would be your advice for people transitioning to a vegan diet, and what should they look at?
So kind of touching on what I was saying before, I think the best thing you can do is have a slow transition. I think if you're looking to make long-term sustainable changes, the worst thing you can do is go cold turkey. I know a lot of people who have done that with going vegetarian, vegan, trying different fad diets, and within a few weeks they're back to their original dietary pattern. So I think a very slow transition, just trying to incorporate a little more fruits and vegetables, or certain food groups, or you could take it from the approach of, hey, I'm going to make one vegan meal per week, or then from there, I'm going to make 2 vegan meals per week, and then eventually you have a vegan day, where just one day in the week you cook vegan, and then you see how you feel, and you slowly add in more and more. And I think that's the most sustainable thing, I think, if you want to make long-term change.
Yeah, you posted a really cool quote on your Instagram. I was just stalking your Instagram and I saw it. And it was about incorporating healthy foods versus cutting out unhealthy foods, right? For, like, a sustainable approach.
Yeah, I mean, I've definitely had a lot of people come up to me more now that I have the Instagram page, and, ask what they can do to eat healthier. And I find that it's a lot easier to tell someone to add something into their diet than take something away. When you make a diet feel very restrictive and say, like, hey, I'm going to take away your favorite food because it's not great for you, it's highly, highly likely that they're going to fall back and crave that food, and it's just going to create a very unhealthy eating pattern. Whereas if you say, hey, start every day with a fruit smoothie, a fruit and vegetable smoothie with berries and kale, but stick to everything else in your diet, it's a lot easier to do, because they don't feel like they're giving anything up, and then they'll start to feel a little bit better. And then it'll motivate them to incorporate more foods. And I noticed that eventually the unhealthy foods get crowded out of their diet.
Yeah, and that's so true, right? Because the second that we start eating healthier, we crave more healthy foods, and then we'll eventually completely transition to just, like, healthy food, That's why that quote is so important, because it's literally how your body works. Your body feels better, you're eating better, and then you're choosing, like, whole foods versus junk food, for example, because of that.
Yeah, and there's actually, a scientific side to that too, that we're seeing now with all the gut microbiome research in the last 15 to 20 years, and how feeding your gut microbiome certain foods actually controls your physiologic cravings for those foods. So you can actually change your cravings being on a certain diet. So it's very interesting stuff.
Yeah. So yeah, so when people are looking to transition to a vegan diet and they, like you said, they start out slowly, like have a vegan day or then afterwards have like a vegan week, like what would be your advice for people to replace their dairy sources and their protein sources for those vegan days? Like how do they transition? What should they look for? What kind of foods to replace it with?
Yeah, I mean, looking at major food groups, definitely fruits, vegetables, nuts, seeds, whole grains, legumes. That should be the main focus. And then learning how to cook with, like before I was vegan, I didn't use tofu much or some of these soy products. So tofu, tempeh, different sources of plant protein, seitan. And so I think now we can talk more about protein later. I just want to touch on right now just some of the nutrients that might be common deficiencies in vegans. I think the biggest one is vitamin B12. And that's one that doesn't present right away. So like my dad's been vegan for 6 years. And then he realized he was vitamin B12 deficient, I think after 4 or 5 years, just because your liver has a lot of extra stores of vitamin B12. So it takes a while. But a lot of vegans take a B12 supplement or a B complex. One thing that's interesting is nutritional yeast. A lot of vegans love nutritional yeast, and it's actually pretty rich in B12. I think 1 teaspoon gives you more than the recommended daily amount of vitamin B12. Wow. So that's just something to consider. You're more than okay taking a supplement, but that I love nutritional yeast. It gives a cheesy flavor to a lot of things. I put it on toast. I mix it in. Yeah, I mix it in sauces. Put it on popcorn, whatever. It's really great. So just something to consider. Yeah. I think 2.4 micrograms is the daily amount that we shoot for B12, and I think 1 teaspoon of nutritional yeast has more than 4 micrograms. Wow. So
I didn't know that. So there must be a reason that I like nutritional yeast, probably because it gives me that B12 boost. Who knows?
So, and it's got a lot of other B vitamins as well. So just something to consider, but you can always supplement as well if you don't like the taste of nutritional yeast or anything like that. Cool. And then there are a few others that are sometimes seen in vegans more commonly, like iodine deficiency. Iodine, though, we usually get from table salt. So it's added to table salt, so you can just use table salt, or what I do is a lot of the sea vegetables have a lot of iodine. So I use seaweed flakes, and I use that as a replacement for salt almost, and that's a good source of iodine.
Wow. So healthy.
Yeah, so I'll sprinkle that on things. Yeah, I use the dulse seaweed flakes, but there's all different types of seaweed and sea vegetables, so that's a potential source to be cognizant of. It's just another seasoning to add almost that makes it easier. And then the last is probably omega-3, and so omega-3 polyunsaturated fatty acids, those a lot of times people will get from fish, and so if you're vegan, you do get sources from certain nuts and seeds, but that's another one that you can supplement with. The most common is algal oil, which comes from algae. And so, that source of omega-3 is the same way that fish get it. So nice. You're going a little more directly to the source, per se.
Yeah. So, because a lot of people even can take omega-3 supplements, but then it comes from fish oil. And I just recently got the vegan supplement, which is coming from, algae. So now I'm taking a omega-3 supplement, and it feels good, honestly. Yeah. I just started recently, but it's good.
The only thing I take really is just a multivitamin and vitamin D. But now I live in Miami, so not sure how much I need the vitamin D supplement. But and then a lot of the minerals, like the mineral deficiencies, like sometimes you see calcium, zinc, things like that. It's a lot of times from a not properly planned vegan diet. If you're focusing on eating a lot of dark leafy green vegetables, a wide array of fruits, nuts, seeds, you'll be more than okay hitting all those. I mean, most people that focus on a whole food plant-based diet, having a wide array of plant foods, they have no issues with those. So just a few to be cognizant of are probably the B12, iodine, and maybe omega-3 as well. Mm-hmm.
So for calcium and stuff, because I know a lot of people will assume they need cow's milk for calcium. That's a common thing, especially in India. When I was there, they have this really big thing where it's like they need cow's milk for calcium. But then your advice would just be to eat more leafy greens, right? Like spinach, kale,
Yeah.
etc. Tofu maybe even.
Tofu as well, has a decent
Yeah.
amount of calcium, so you get more than enough from properly planned plant-based diet.
Cool. Yeah, no, that's amazing nutritional advice to kind of look out for and to make sure that you're eating all those different things. And I guess your main focus is to be like on a whole foods, plant-based diet when you're talking about that.
Yeah,
Do you?
and I think it's
Yeah.
sorry. I was just gonna add
No,
one more
please.
point on that note, but I think it's easy for people to point out like those potential deficiencies and really lean heavy into that, but then there's the counter side, which is you're getting way more phytonutrients and vitamins and minerals that you normally wouldn't get from a not so plant predominant diet. And those have largely beneficial effects. So there are a lot of micronutrients that you're getting way more of on a plant-based diet, just a handful that you have to be cognizant of.
Nice. No, I love that because immediately a lot of people, there's a lot of like, oh, vegan diets aren't healthy or you're lacking certain things. But I guess it's all about knowing kind of what to eat. On that topic then on eating like whole foods and does vegan equal healthy? Do you incorporate any like processed foods into your diet? Like, do you eat beyond burgers or vegan cheeses, or what's like your opinion on that?
Yeah, so this goes back to that question of does vegan equal healthy, and
Yeah.
I think a lot of people, when you tell them you're vegan, they automatically assume you're healthy, and it doesn't necessarily mean that. You know, you could be vegan and eat Oreos and potato chips all day, and you're technically vegan, but we know that's not the most healthy diet.
Yeah. Not gonna lie, that's me sometimes.
Yeah, and it goes back to, you know, putting it in the context of what your motives are for going vegan. There's people that are vegan strictly for animal and environmental reasons, and they are pretty aware of the fact that they don't really care much about the health reasons, and that's okay if that's their goal and those are their motives. So it's important to give context, because veganism's unique in that aspect. It's the only diet that has non-health motives. Every other diet, you know, every fad diet that you see, somebody's doing it for health reasons. With respect to processed foods, I really try to, you know, eat as close to the earth as possible, as they say. Limit processed foods. I did used to use some vegan cheeses and stuff like that as I was transitioning. But overall, I try to eat, you know, whole foods. And, you know, we have a lot of studies showing that as you increase the percentage or ratio of ultra processed foods in your diet, it increases your risk of a lot of chronic diseases, cardiovascular disease, diabetes. And we do have studies showing that. But again, it's really hard to make blanket statements, because there's foods that are technically ultra processed, but have actually become more beneficial for us after that processing, or less harmful. So in general, that's a good rule, but it's hard to make blanket statements saying, oh, avoid all ultra processed foods, or
what are ultra processed foods?
Yeah, so they put it into categories of mild, moderate, and ultra processed, I believe. And so it has to do with, you know, how much how much change the food goes through from the time it's grown until the time it gets to your plate or your mouth.
Got it. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not too familiar on the specific definitions of how they define what's ultra processed.
Okay. But what would be an example, like store-bought food? Like, what could be an example of like ultra-processed foods?
Yeah, like a lot of the processed meats, but even vinegar technically, which is great for us. There's a lot of health benefits of vinegar, is technically ultra processed. So that's why I say you can't make those blanket statements.
Yeah.
But yeah, I try to avoid a lot of the processed foods, but you can argue that if somebody's switching out a processed meat for a Beyond Burger to help them transition, you could argue that that's a beneficial change. It might not be as good as having a bowl with, you know, lentils and a bunch of other legumes and tofu. And a bunch of veggies, but if it's going to help someone transition and they're making a step in the right direction, then I think that's absolutely worth it. And the ultimate goal is to try to eat as minimally processed and whole
Yeah.
food plant-based as possible.
No, but that's awesome because I feel like that's the reason why these Beyond Burgers exist, is to help in that transitioning, because then you don't have to immediately have to cut out something. You can just cook the exact same meal that you were cooking before, and just put those meat substitutes in it, and it will taste the same and it'll just be a little bit healthier for you. And then the next step would be to just completely eat like whole foods. But I love the fact that those alternatives exist, and you can make the spaghetti bolognese that you were making before with like with the meat, and then you just completely like, yeah, just have a plant-based alternative. So I hate the fact that people use the Beyond Burgers as like an anti-vegan argument to say like, oh, but your food's processed too, or Beyond Burgers are not healthy for you. And then you have the vegan for the animals people who are like, I don't care if it's not healthy for me, I do it for the animals. Like, an animal doesn't have to die for my burger. And then yeah, the healthy vegans are like, okay, like you just eat it in balance. You don't need to, like, I don't eat Beyond Burgers like all the time. Like maybe once I would if I crave a burger. But it's not the main point of the vegan diet. It's not like people like to zone in on that processed foods, and that the vegan cheeses are just like coconut oil and stuff. But yeah, it's not like, it's like you said, it's helps transitioning to like a vegan diet. So I completely agree.
Yep.
Cool. Talking on the topic of like Beyond Burgers and stuff, so let's talk about protein and a common misconception in the fitness industry, especially because you're also in fitness. So I think you get it all the time, where a lot of those gym bros are like, oh, you can't be vegan and gain muscle. You have to eat meat. You have to have this amount of protein. How are you going to hit this amount of protein on a vegan diet? And yeah, I think this is like such an important topic of discussion, protein in general, because a lot of people, yeah, they want to hit those like amount of protein goals. They have these protein goals, and like, yeah, how do you hit them on a vegan diet? Or yeah, let's just dive right into the protein aspect of it.
Yeah, I think that's been the narrative for decades, and I think it's dying out a little bit, fortunately, because we have a lot more people thriving on plant-based diets. But there's that misconception that, you associate meat with protein. And a lot of the protein sources I talked about earlier, a lot of the plant protein sources, tofu, tempeh, lentils, seitan, all that stuff, are really good sources of protein. But it's important to acknowledge, what the argument is from the other side. And that's that, they talk about the lower bioavailability and amino acid profiles of plant proteins. And that's absolutely true. But just for some quick context, so for the listeners, the building blocks of protein are amino acids, and there's 9 what are called essential amino acids. So those are amino acids that you have to get from diet, and you can't get that from, your body can't produce it. So the 9 essential amino acids, if you look at a lot of animal proteins versus plant proteins, there's higher levels in the animal proteins. Now, and there's lower bioavailability of the plant protein sometimes. So if you give someone the same amount of leucine, which is one of the essential amino acids, from a plant source and from an animal source, it'll still show sometimes slightly lower levels in the blood of leucine in the plant, from the plant-based source. So there is lower bioavailability. Now, does that mean that plant-based sources are inferior? And no, we've proven from a muscle growth standpoint. There's actually a study done earlier this year that compared vegan to omnivorous diets. And it shows that if you give people a sufficient amount of protein, I think they use 1.8 grams per kilogram of body weight per day. And if you're having sufficient amount of protein, you achieve the exact same level of muscle protein synthesis and muscle gain. And one of the reasons for that is because, so just for a little bit more biochem background, there's a pathway called the mTOR pathway, and that's involved in muscle protein synthesis, and leucine is one of the main essential amino acids that triggers this process and activates mTOR. Now, you might need, when you're at rest, a certain amount of leucine to activate this pathway, but what happens is when you work out and you resistance train, you actually lower the threshold. So you're now sensitized to the effects of leucine. So that resistance training in itself causes some activation of mTOR. And so now to hit that maximal protein synthesis that you can get, it takes a lot less leucine, as well as the other amino acids. So resistance training sensitizes your body to the anabolic effects of these essential amino acids. And so that's probably the mechanism behind why we see the same level of muscle growth. And there's definitely a maximum. So it's not like more protein or higher essential amino acids or greater bioavailability past a certain point is going to add any benefit. So there's definitely a cutoff. And if you're hitting usually like 25 to 30 grams of protein per meal, obviously varies depending on body weight, you can maximally activate muscle protein synthesis. So it's a little bit of a nuanced discussion, because I think that's the flip side of the argument, that there's this lower or inferior amino acid profile and lower bioavailability. But when you look at the actual human outcome data, there's really no difference. Not to mention
that is so interesting.
Yeah, and not to mention that, we can get into this more later, but just we have studies showing that when you swap animal protein for plant protein, you're now drastically reducing your risk of a lot of chronic diseases, cardiovascular disease, diabetes, a lot of, metabolic syndrome. And so that's been pretty well studied when you swap animal protein for plant protein. So it's like, if you can achieve the same level of muscle protein synthesis and the same amount of muscle gain, then why not switch to a plant protein? And then and one last point on that is, I think we're so hyper focused on protein. It's like I think everybody's always so worried. I think protein's super important, especially as we grow older. Lean mass is one of the best markers of longevity. And reducing your mortality risk is having more lean mass as you age. So protein's definitely important. But if you look at how many people are actually protein deficient or not able to achieve enough muscle gain on a plant protein diet, or just in general, it's a very, very small percentage. Now you compare that to the percentage of the population that has a bunch of chronic disease, that is fiber deficient, that has, our biggest killers, cardiovascular disease, neurodegenerative disease, cancer. It's an overwhelming majority of the population. So I think the focus definitely needs to shift from, it's like, okay, we got enough protein. We're not as worried about protein. Let's worry about getting enough fiber and, plant foods and eating enough vegetables. So
Yeah. We need to shift the topic of conversation, because it's true that a lot of people focus on protein, and I think it's still the advice nowadays from a lot of fitness instructors, like, oh, you need to hit 100 grams of protein, and I think it's kind of like we don't actually need that much protein. Like it's like you said, there's like with the amino acids, it might apply to same protein, I'm not sure, where it's like if you hit the minimum, then that's good enough for the muscle growth. Is that true?
It depends. Like, it's very hard to say 100 grams for varying body weights, for varying lean mass, depending on your goals, if you're looking to build muscle. So it's hard to say an exact number that'll be accurate for everyone. But I'm able to hit 160 grams a day of protein on a plant-based diet without eating any protein bars. Occasionally I'll take like protein powder. But I think there's, like I was saying, there's definitely a maximum. So once you hit that maximum of triggering muscle protein synthesis, there's not much added benefit after that from having more protein.
Nice. And talking about the protein powder then, I think that's also a discussion in the fitness industry about the whey protein versus plant-based protein. And they still kind of feel that whey protein is more effective. What are your thoughts on that, on protein powder?
Yeah, similar to this to what we were just talking about. Whey protein is a very high quality protein. It's got a very good essential amino acid profile. It's also very quickly absorbed, so that's why a lot of people like to take it right after a workout. But we've also shown that this idea of the anabolic window is not what we thought it was. Like, people rushing to get protein within 30 minutes of their workout, it's actually not necessary. We've pretty much shown with a lot of good data now that, or at least with the current data that we have, the conclusion is that we're sensitized, like I was saying before, to those anabolic effects of protein for an extended period of time. It's many hours. It's so as long as you're sticking to getting your 25 to 30 grams of protein per meal, or maybe a little bit more on a vegan diet, you're more than okay doing that 3 to 4 hours after your workout. Just it's not like you have to rush to get protein after. So yeah, I think it has to do more with the total amount of protein. Like I said in that study, they were getting a sufficient amount of protein, and that was equated in both diets. So yeah, just something to be cognizant of. But once you learn to cook with like the plant protein sources, I think it's definitely worth swapping where you can for animal protein, just from a chronic disease risk as well from that standpoint.
Yeah, amazing. Talking about your 160 grams protein, I'm quite curious about your like vegan meals that have this much protein. Could you share a bit about like what you eat in a day?
Yeah, so usually, I mean, with school and everything, my meals can get a little bit repetitive just because I meal prep for the week for time purposes. But
That's good.
in the morning,
Meal prep's always good.
yeah, in the morning I'll usually have like a tofu scramble on avocado toast. And so I'm getting a decent amount of protein from the tofu, and I also had nutritional yeast, and I didn't mention earlier, but nutritional yeast also has a decent amount of protein. So if you're sprinkling that on several meals throughout the day, you can get 10-15 grams of protein more throughout your day just from there, depending on how much you're using. But
Nice.
that's probably my first meal, and then I'll have usually overnight oats. And so in my oats, I'll have a bunch of chia seeds, hemp seeds, flax seeds, and then I use peanut butter powder because it's a lot more,
Nice.
there's a lot higher
PB
ratio
Fit?
of, yeah. I use
Yeah.
a different brand. I use the Sun Warrior brand right now.
Okay,
But
cool.
PB used to use PB2.
Yeah.
But yeah, you get a lot of protein from there. And so, whereas with regular peanut butter, to get the same amount of protein, you'd have to take in a lot more calories just because you have a lot of fat
Yeah.
in there as well. So
Yeah,
not
yeah,
that
yeah.
peanut butter's bad or inferior, it's just depending on your goals. So, and then really like, I often use the red lentil pasta from Trader Joe's. I get that one, or any kind of lentil pasta, because lentils are really high in protein. So
Nice.
I will, and also just to diversify my protein sources a bit. So I'll use that. And, it's pretty easy to get 25-30 grams of protein in your meal when you're using the red lentil pasta. And then I'll make my own sauce with blend it with silken tofu. So then it makes like a creamier sauce and you're adding some
Nice.
protein. And then my meals vary a little bit from there. I definitely try to incorporate tempeh in at least one meal every day. Tempeh's got a lot of protein, more than tofu. And so,
Nice.
I get the Trader Joe's organic tempeh, and I think one block has 48 grams of protein. So I'll put half of that in a meal with a bunch of veggies, edamame, maybe some noodles. And then that's 4 meals I listed so far. So
Yeah,
usually I
no.
have 4 to 5 meals a day, and then the rest is usually smoothies. I try to drink at least 1 or 2 smoothies a day just to get a lot of nutrients
Fruits.
from...
Yeah.
Yeah, from fruits and vegetables. So sometimes in the smoothie, if I'm short on protein for the day, I will also throw in a scoop of protein powder, like a vegan protein powder, but
Nice.
not always, because I'll usually use a whole block of tempeh and get 50 grams right there. So
Wow, that sounds so yum, honestly. All of that.
yeah,
But I
it's
love
a bit
yeah.
yeah. No, go ahead.
I love the red lentil pasta. I think it's a great alternative so that you to other pastas so you can get that protein fix. It's nice. It tastes
Yeah,
good too.
I know a lot of people use the chickpea pasta as well.
Yeah.
I used to use
Yeah.
that. I mix it up sometimes, but I know
Yeah,
there's a
me
soybean
too.
spaghetti that people use. So there's definitely a lot of
Yeah.
ways to just switch out your pasta to add a ton of
Yeah.
protein.
Yeah. No, same. I do that as well. The chickpea
Yeah.
pasta and stuff. Nice. A little bit about your personal fitness journey then, because I'm guessing that you've been in your fitness journey non-vegan and vegan. So can you share anything about a difference you've seen in terms of in your fitness journey, muscle growth, or your performance levels now on a vegan diet?
Yeah, so I wouldn't say it's directly the vegan diet itself has directly
Okay.
improved anything that I'm doing in terms of muscle gain or fat loss or anything like that. And that's kind of one of the things that Game Changers gets a lot of hate for, because it almost over exaggerates the
Okay.
benefits, and so I like to be very realistic with people. Like there's no magic diet, there's no magic pill, but indirectly it's definitely helped. And that goes back to what I was saying before about once you trigger muscle protein synthesis with a certain amount of protein, it's the same. You maximally activated mTOR, and there's really not much more you can do from. There's not much variation as long as you're maximally activating muscle protein synthesis. So indirectly, though, I've definitely felt better, and it's been from a handful of different health practices. So it's not just that I went vegan and like whole food plant-based. I also, made sure to be better about my sleep and, exercising routinely and, getting in proper nutrients and all these different things, using the sauna, cold therapy. And so it was a lot of health habits at once that I do. So indirectly, though, I'm sure that the vegan diet has definitely had some impact. You feel less sluggish after a lot of meals when you're eating, whole food plant-based diet. You tend to have more energy. I'm sure the sleep also helped with, more energy as well. Yeah, so indirectly it's helped me. But I'm not going to, come out here and say, oh, if you go vegan, you're going to gain more muscle than if you're not vegan. It's more just that you can achieve the same level of athletic performance and muscle gain on any diet. It's just a matter of what foods you're eating. It's more about dietary patterns than a specific diet. But it's, again, there's more issues to worry about than just, there's more issues to worry about than just which one's the easiest to build muscle on, because you can build muscle on any of them. You have to also look at your overall health if that's your goal with your diet.
Nice. No, I think it's important to just note that it is possible, at least. It's kind of like that people like to think that it's not possible. And then just to show that it is possible, that's already, important.
Yeah, and it's more than possible. It's very doable. It's not just like it's this extremely difficult thing, but it just takes a little bit of careful planning and transitioning into the foods that you eat. And there's so many vegan bodybuilders now that you see on Instagram and stuff like that, where
no, but it's true, because like you said, like people will choose animal-based sources. I think maybe because they're just more used to it, or it's just easier for it to access or whatever. But then you have to be wary of like, you'll get protein, but you'll also get more risks of diseases, and just like to think about your health as like number one focus.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like, you talk to gym bros. I've got some friends like this where it's like, okay, I got 60 grams of protein in my animal protein meal, but there's no benefit after a certain point of getting that much protein. And then you're just bringing on other potential health risks depending on the food that you're getting the protein from. So, yeah. Yeah,
no, exactly. I'm going to talk more about protein and talk about soy.
Okay.
Because I think, soy is such a great source for vegans, and just in general, it's so healthy for you. And there's such a big misconception out there on soy. They're saying soy has estrogen levels, so people need to be wary of soy. And it's just so sad that there's this misconception, because I love everything soy. Like, I think soy is great for you, tofu is great for you, edamame beans, and then it's sad that a lot of people just immediately kind of say, no, soy has estrogen, that's why I'm not going to eat it. Whereas I think studies have proven that it's plant estrogen, and it doesn't really impact your estrogen levels. Or maybe you can share more about that if you know more about that.
How much time do we have? I think this could be an hour-long discussion itself, but I'll try to do my best to summarize. So I'll give some context. So soy contains, and not just soy, like flax seeds as well, contain phytoestrogens, specifically isoflavones, which are a category of phytoestrogens. In flax seeds, it's more of lignans, they're called, but they all fall under this umbrella of phytoestrogens. And so phytoestrogens are these plant compounds that are structurally similar to estrogen. And so that has now fueled this whole school of thought that, okay, if you eat these phytoestrogens, you're going to increase your estrogen levels, reduce your testosterone levels, and, cause hormone imbalances and all these things. And it's, the data has been pretty clear that that's not what happens. So phytoestrogens do not act the same in the body as regular estrogen does, our endogenous estrogen. So phytoestrogens actually have a much weaker binding affinity to the estrogen receptor. So if anything, they can maybe have a very weak estrogenic effect, or they could have no effect, or they can even have an anti-estrogenic effect. And so there's two types of estrogen receptors. There's estrogen receptor alpha and estrogen receptor beta. And so these phytoestrogens actually preferentially bind estrogen receptor beta. And the significance of that is that those estrogen receptors tend to modulate the effects of estrogen receptor alpha, those estrogenic effects. So, and it depends on the tissue that you're in. So if you're in reproductive tissue and you have a much higher concentration of estrogen receptor beta, you can actually have an inhibitory effect by binding that receptor. And so understanding that basic background is really essential in then going into every discussion about does this affect our estrogen levels, does this affect our testosterone levels, does this increase my breast cancer risk if I'm going to, if I have a hormone dependent breast cancer that, is estrogen receptor positive, does it affect other hormone dependent cancers such as certain prostate cancers? And so now we can dive into each of those subtopics once you have that context. So we have a lot of human, data, good quality data. And that's an important point as well, because I think we have a lot of preclinical data in vitro and in rodents that shows mixed results. So, there's in vitro studies showing that estrogen actually causes proliferation of certain tumors and cancer cells, and people then draw the conclusion that, okay, this is going to increase my cancer risk. But while preclinical data can be valuable in the absence of clinical data, if you have human outcome data, which we do, that's going to trump the preclinical data. So let's look at what actually happens in humans. So there's been several meta-analyses on, I believe, like over 40 randomized control trials showing that the phytoestrogen intake from soy has no significant effect on estrogen and testosterone levels. That's been pretty clearly proven. So that concern's gone. There are like a handful of case reports of men that had some issues, but they were consuming very, very high levels of soy. Like I'm talking, much higher than, I eat a lot of soy. I eat a lot of soy. I told you I eat tofu, tempeh in multiple meals throughout my day, and I'm nowhere close to it. So nothing of concern.
Nice.
And then we can talk a bit about breast cancer risk and things like that. So we have a lot of data on this, the association between soy and breast cancer. And so what it shows, because there's a lot of variation depending on whether in the study they were given a soy protein isolate or if they're getting it from foods like tofu, tempeh, or from a supplement, or also whether it was within Western or Asian populations, the amount they were getting. So there's a lot of variables. But overall, what it seems like is that there's no negative effect of soy with respect to breast cancer. And
Nice.
If anything, there actually may be a beneficial effect. So we have studies showing that in women that had breast cancer, there's actually a significantly reduced risk of recurrence with soy intake. And then we've also shown that there's potential associations with reduced risk of prostate cancer. And we've also shown that soy can reduce the risk of a lot of different cancers outside those two as well, especially if you're swapping an animal protein, if you're out of your diet for a plant protein. So
Yeah.
I think it's a very nuanced discussion, and sometimes the internet can be toxic. It's just like you've got this one side screaming soy is bad for you and it's going to give you man boobs, and then there's this other side screaming, soy is great and it's the best thing ever. And it's like most things, it's
Yeah.
always more nuanced. And like
Yeah.
an example of where it may have estrogenic effects that's beneficial is with women going through menopause. So we have studies looking at women going through menopause And those who had a higher soy intake actually had reduced symptoms of menopause, so like 20% less hot flashes and things like that. So that's a situation where, a woman going through menopause, her estrogen levels are dropping, but the soy can actually modulate her estrogen levels by having estrogenic effects and then mitigating the menopause symptoms. So it's a very nuanced discussion. It depends on, your current estrogen levels, whether you're male, female, what age you are. There's so many variables, but I have overall can say that there's not many negative effects of soy. It seems overall beneficial. And then, the one caveat I'll say is like if you have a soy allergy, obviously don't eat soy.
Yeah.
And then the last discussion within there, the at least major discussion, is with hypothyroidism. So there's some data showing that soy can interfere with the effects of iodine and thyroid function. Okay. And so I know there's some, and I'm not too familiar with all of the data on it, but I know that if you have hypothyroidism and you take like levothyroxine or one of those drugs for hypothyroidism, you shouldn't take it at the same time as consuming soy because it can interfere with the effects of those drugs. So that's a specific subset of people with hypothyroidism that should look a little more into their soy intake and plan a little more carefully. But I don't think they need to entirely avoid soy either. It just, takes a little more careful planning.
Wow, that's amazing to hear. And then, like, you're kind of debunking that misconception. Thank you for that. And you said at the beginning that you don't think you know much, but that completely proves it wrong. You do. You have a lot to share, which is really good. Because
you.
it's just so common that people will say that and they'll be like, oh, don't eat too much soy. It's not good for you. But I love soy, so.
And it's funny. It's all the, like, anti-vegan people, and they're they don't look at it. The ironic part is dairy has
I know
a lot of hormones, and one of them is estrogen, these bovine hormones, and it's like dairy's been associated with increased prostate cancer risk, increased breast cancer risk, but that discussion sometimes gets overshadowed by the whole soy discussion. But it's not as and it's not like I'm saying that dairy's gonna kill you. The levels of hormones are nowhere close to our own endogenous levels where it can alter it much in the same way. But it's just funny that discussion, I feel like, gets overshadowed.
But can you share more then about the hormone levels in dairy that you know of? Because I don't know much about like the specifics.
Yeah, as far as I know, I mean, I'm not an expert on it particularly, but as far as I know, there's, these bovine hormones from the cows in the milk that we drink, and that's in our dairy products. Obviously, a lot more in a glass of milk than in, cheese or yogurt or something like that. But it's not something that's going to significantly alter our hormone levels much that I've seen, but it has been associated with increased risk of certain cancers, prostate cancer, and breast cancer I touched on, as well as some others that I'm pretty sure I've read about. So,
that's why, That's why it's like when you have a hormone-based cancer, then you should be careful with dairy. Like that much I know, but I didn't know much about like how much it does increase your hormone levels. But yeah.
Yeah, and there's always these unique cases, and the beauty of scientific literature is it's always changing, and we always change our perspectives on things. So if you're someone who has tried soy, and it just doesn't work for you, then at the end of the day, you listen to your body. Everything's a case-by-case basis. And try to figure out. Mm-hmm.
Can we talk a bit about, I think you mentioned to me before when we were doing our brainstorm about the Blue Zone diet and that you kind of really advocate for this particular diet. Could you talk more about what it is and what are your thoughts on it?
Yeah, so just some context for the listeners. Blue zones are these 5 areas of the world. You might have to help me out with remembering all of them off the top of my head. I know it's like Loma Linda, California, Icaria, Sardinia, and then Yeah, I think there's in Okinawa as well. That's four. I'm missing one. But these are these five regions of the world that were identified about 20 years ago that had a significantly higher than average number of centenarians, which are people living past 100. So obviously a ton of researchers then decided to determine what are the commonalities between these populations. Why are they living so long? What's their secret to longevity, if you will? So diet is just, I think they've identified 9 themes. Diet is just one of them.
Okay.
I think the other ones are very interesting. Not our topic of
Yeah.
today, but I think the other ones are very interesting. So just like
Do
a
you
sense
know
of
what they are?
community.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's like a sense of community and purpose, which I find really interesting. Um,
Cool.
and they move a lot. Movement's really huge. They don't necessarily go to the gym every day the way we do. I feel like there's a lot of people who go to the gym for 2 hours a day and then are relatively sedentary the rest of their day. Whereas, in these blue zones, they're not going to work out, but they're pretty active. They're on the move most
Yeah.
of their day. So that's one of them. But going back to the dietary standpoint, all of their diets, they're not 100% vegan. I believe one of them is in Loma Linda, California, but I might be wrong on that. But they are predominantly plant-based. They eat a lot of legumes, fruits, vegetables, nuts, seeds, limit, meat intake, limit dairy, eggs, fish. They do still eat some of those, but predominantly plant-based diets. And so that's why, I hate, and this is where the internet can be toxic sometimes. It puts everybody in these buckets of like this diet versus this diet versus this diet.
Yeah.
I'm all for more of dietary patterns. So focusing on food groups and nutrients. So saying like, I think one of the best things to focus on in terms of dietary pattern is a high fiber, low saturated fat, diet.
Yeah. Nice.
Rich in plant foods with fruits, vegetables, nuts, seeds, like a wide array of foods. I think that's a lot more effective than telling someone, hey, you should follow this diet completely and strictly. It creates very unhealthy relationships with food and eating, and contributes to a lot of eating disorders. I think when people are like, oh, I can't touch a carb, I'm on a keto diet.
Yeah.
When you look at, I will say though, like the carnivore diet is
I was gonna say,
probably
yeah.
one of the probably one of the ones that's objectively harmful.
Yeah, and it's so
it's
big
kind of sad
nowadays.
to see. Yeah,
If
you've got
the
people
Carnivore
like Carnivore,
MD.
and Liver King and these guys on Instagram, and it's sad to see like there's a lot of people who are on Instagram and looking for actual help with nutrition.
Yeah.
And it's sad to think that there's people with heart disease that are trying to figure out how to improve their health and their lifespan and try to get the most out of their life after having a heart attack or coronary artery disease. And you've got people like Carnivore MD telling them to eat very high saturated fat diets, that's okay. I think that's almost criminal, if you ask me, telling them to do what most of the data shows is harmful from a cardiovascular disease standpoint. So that's
bad.
why I would say the carnivore diet is one of those ones that's like objectively a harmful diet. And it's really sad because it's more about profitability. These guys are selling supplements like
I was gonna
Liver
ask,
King.
like, why
he
does
was,
yeah.
mhm.
Yeah, I was gonna ask,
I
like,
mean,
why
I
does
think-
Carnivore MD do this? Like why does he do this? Literally.
That's a good question. I mean, I think people feel good on certain diets, and so I don't doubt that he feels good on his diet. I don't doubt that he wants to help people. I just think that a lot of times he'll focus on, and this goes back to what we were saying about, different quality of scientific evidence. So he'll focus very much on mechanistic data. So he'll talk about the anti-nutrients in plants, and he'll focus on how they'll reduce absorption of certain minerals and really just hyper focus on that and say, okay, therefore plants are bad for you. But like I said before, if you look at if you have human outcome data, which we do, the more vegetables you eat, the better health outcomes you have. And that's something that anyone who looks at research, nutrition research, whether they're vegan, non-vegan, omnivores, anything, there's pretty much nobody that denies that you need to have sufficient plant, specifically vegetable and fiber intake. So that's why I consider that one a particularly harmful diet and misleading, because you're actively telling people to avoid the foods that are beneficial. So I think it's my for lack of a better term, my beef with the carnivore diet is that not so much how much he promotes meat. Yeah, that's definitely part of it, but like you're telling people not to eat vegetables. Which just about everybody else agrees on. So that's my thoughts on the carnivore diet. Keto, I've got my thoughts on as well.
Yeah, just to go back to the carnivore diet, I was just stalking the Instagram page, and then like he's recommending dairy, and then a lot of comments are like, oh, but I'm lactose intolerant. So then, and then he's still like, and I think that's so sad. Like all these people that are having issues with these foods, they're told to consume these foods, and it's just, like you said, it should be illegal to give out advice that's harmful for them,
Yeah, I mean, and he's a physician. He's giving out advice to patients, so it's and I'm not sure if he still practices. I have no idea. I don't follow him that closely. I don't think it's good for my mental health. But it's
it's just sad.
But the keto diet was originally, like, I think first implemented maybe I think about 100 years ago for epilepsy. That's another one that I don't really entirely understand as a fad diet. I don't think it's a very sustainable long-term diet. I think that going low carb has its benefits for some people, and it really depends on what your health status is.
For weight loss that people do it?
That's probably one of my biggest pet peeves is that a keto diet is what's causing you to lose weight, just like the same way people say intermittent fasting is what caused them to lose weight. Yes, you might have lost weight on those diets, but it's not the diet or the time restricted eating per se that caused you to lose weight. It's the caloric deficit. If you're eating less calories than you burned, that's how energy balance works. That's what's going to cause you to lose weight. So it doesn't have to do with a specific diet. I could, going back to the vegan that eats Oreos and potato chips all day, if they eat less than they're burning, they'll lose weight. Doesn't necessarily mean like that's the weight loss diet. So keto I think is a very difficult diet to sustain long term, and I think it's very, very nearly impossible to do in a healthy way. I think when you lower your carbs that much and you increase fats that much, you end up taking in a lot of unhealthy saturated fats that might cause worse outcomes from a lipid standpoint, So that's my thoughts on keto. And then I think just in general, my thoughts on like what's the best diet, it's not one that falls into any of these categories. If we're talking from a strictly health standpoint, it's one that, like I said, is predominantly plant-based, high in fiber, low in saturated fat. Those are like the patterns you want to look for. Yeah, like the Blue Zone diet. Do you have any more questions?
I think the final question for you would be a little bit about you and your future goals and what's next for you, and especially you're going to be like a plant-based doctor, which is super cool. We need many more plant-based doctors out there who like study plant-based nutrition. So that's super important as a doctor. So yeah, what are your future goals and what's next for you?
Yeah, so I'm finishing up my first year of medical school. I got 3 more years to go. In terms of what type of medicine I want to practice, I'm really interested in oncology. But given my interest in nutrition and all these holistic health practices, I really want to practice some sort of integrative medicine. So ideally integrative oncology, kind of combining conventional care with complementary therapies and lifestyle advice as well. So that would be my ideal career path. So got a long way to go. Got 4 years of med school, and then 3 years of residency, and 3 years of fellowship after that. So it's a long way to go, but I'm enjoying every step of the journey.
Amazing.
Loving learning, and everything that I'm doing on the side with learning about nutrition as well. I'm loving so.
Yeah. You said you wanted to go more into the cancer-based research when, like, you eventually go into practice?
Yeah, I'd like to practice oncology, so working with
Oh,
cancer
that's what you
patients,
said.
and
Sorry.
that's
You said that.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, no worries.
Yeah. Sorry. I didn't know what it meant. I was just like, but then, okay, oncology means cancer-based research. Cool.
Yeah.
That's amazing. I think that's so, like, inspiring. And then, like, you have so many years ahead, but you're, like, so passionate about it, and you're sharing it on social media. And I think that's all really, really cool. I think that's how you make the biggest impact for the vegan movement is, like, nutrition is, like, one of the biggest things for the vegan movement is telling people, because at the end of the day, I think people are very selfish and they'd like to put their health first. And it's amazing that we can advertise for veganism through plant-based to say this is the healthiest for you. This is how you can achieve the best health. So thank you for what you're doing for the vegan movement.
Yeah, thank you for having me and letting me speak, and
Yeah.
thanks for everything you do too with your platform. It's a lot of good
Thank you.
information. So
Thank you, Akash.
all right.
Thank you everyone for listening. And yeah, we'll see you next time.